So, what questions should we ask before choosing the right lab for NGS? Whenever we do comprehensive genomic profiling, essentially we are looking for some mutation or some abnormality or irregularity that has to be detected with a good amount of accuracy and positive association. So, why is this basic education important? Look at this picture. These thieves went into the bank and stole this machine. And lo and behold, instead of stealing the ATM machine, what they have stolen is a passbook printing machine. So, this is the problem that most of us face today when we are talking about molecular testing, because we have not paid enough attention to a basic education on the subject. So, my talk today is going to be exceedingly basic, and I hope that I am able to clear some of the misconceptions that some of us have. So, we should have the right expectation, we should follow or select the right test, and we should look at the right results. Now, whether the right expectation is, are we looking for a organ of origin specific test or a tissue agnostic test? And I will allude to the tissue agnostic test a little bit later. Are we looking for common or rare mutations? Are we looking for specific known mutations, or are we exploring any possible mutations that could be in the patient? Are we looking for SNVs or CNVs or indels or fusions? Because the test could be different for each of them. Is the mutation that we are looking at germline, as Dr. Ashok Vaid was mentioning, or somatic mutations? And are we using the source of the sample as a solid biopsy or a liquid biopsy? The right test could be DNA, RNA, or proteins. It could be that we are focusing only on the hotspot, or we want a comprehensive genomic profiling. Are we looking at a small, medium, or large part of the gene under consideration? And whether it is whole exome, that is the coding region, or the whole genome sequencing that we ultimately want. As far as the results are concerned, we want to know what is the true positive versus true negative, and whether it is VAF or CNV or equivocal, and especially for NGS, what was the depth of the coverage and how much of the gene was covered. So, genomic biomarkers of interest that we in the real world want to look at is, one is tumor mutation burden, second is microsatellite instability, the third is loss of heterozygosity, homologous recombinant deficiency score or HRD score, and potential germline predictions, in addition to the mutations that I talked to you earlier. So in NGS, what are the steps that we go through to complete a successful testing process? So when we have a DNA sample preparation, there is first the library preparation, then it is cluster generation. The third part is the sequencing. And when we talk about NGS, the S stands for sequencing, which is only the third part. Then we go to reference mapping, and then it comes in the bioinformatics with the variant calling and bioinformatics analysis. And only after curating this information that comes out, we can actually come to a sensible result or report. And the bottleneck in the entire process is the bioinformatics analysis that could take several weeks to complete. We also want repeatability and reproducibility. And here I've taken the very few examples. For instance, the ALK rearrangement at the top and the BRCA2 short variant at the bottom. And you can clearly see that there are so many well-documented aberrations, and we have a very good repeatability and reproducibility for various tests that are currently available to us. So we should rest assured that molecular testing is something that is very reliable as of. What are the chances of missing mutations even if you have done a proper test? In 2015 and 16, they said that if you do HER2 mutation versus fish or IHC in breast, there's a 15% chance of missing a mutation if you rely only on fish IHC. If you are doing EGFR exon 19 deletion in lung cancer, and if you are doing only hotspot versus whole exome sequencing, there is a 17% chance of missing a mutation. Standard tests for EGFR point mutations were missed in as many as 1/5 of patients. And again, if you look at hotspots versus whole gene, 26% were missed in hotspots in 2015. If you look at ALK fusion in lung cancer, again, the missing is 35%. And today, how many targetable alterations were missed if NGS is not done properly? It is as many as half our patients. So we need the right test and we need the right instrument. And all the 4 instruments that are shown here are different types of NGS machines that can be used for a proper test. Now, when you choose an NGS, you want a broad panel or a hotspot or limited panel testing. So limited panel is short or hotspot and large panel is broad panel. Now, as you go into 3 factors, cost per sample, validation time, and value of discovery, you can see that for small samples, the cost per sample is less, validation time is less, but value of discovery is red. So it is hardly anything. And as you go to the large panel or whole exome sequencing, that is all the coding regions or the whole genome sequencing, the cost and validation time increases, but the value is even greater, as you can see in the graph. So to summarize, small is when you are looking for expected things, you use a hotspot or a small panel. This is diagnostic used in tumors with known actionable biomarkers, or if the patient has cost constraints, or if you have a limited tissue that can be evaluated for molecular testing, or if you want the results very fast. On the other hand, you should choose a larger or whole exome sequencing when you don't know what you're looking for. So if you have a problem where there is diagnostic use in tumors which are molecularly heterogeneous with not many actionable targets, that is rare actionable targets, tissue is sufficient, results may not deter ongoing treatment line. So if the results come a little later, it's fine. Cost is not an issue, and especially if it is for a specific research. Now let's move to liquid biopsy. And liquid biopsy is nothing but the source of the sample that is loaded onto the NGS machine will be a liquid like a peripheral blood. And of course, it could be other liquids as well. This can be used for screening, for diagnosis, for staging and prognosis, for therapy selection, and for monitoring of patients. If you look at what was discussed in ESMO 2021, that means this year, there's a very good review on how to use liquid biopsies to treat patients with cancer in the real world setting. And I will just show you 3 slides where liquid biopsy is very appropriate. The first is MRD detection and adjuvant therapy. Circulating tumor DNA analysis can be done. And there are 3 groups which have tested this theory. The Tai et al. Group depicted that ctDNA has more prognostic power than routine clinical pathological features in stage 2 and 3 colon cancer. And other 2 groups have also worked on colon cancer. So this concept, of course, for each organ of origin cancer needs to be clinically validated. The second is screening and early detection of cancer. And obviously we know how this could be exceedingly valuable because now we can cure larger group of patients. And the third is as an immune oncology biomarker so that it can be used and all the stages, all the 5 stages that I showed you in the earlier slide. Now let's move to PDL1 and the immunohistochemistry. On the left side, you can see how under the microscope, the area of the sections can be distinguished between tumor and normal tissue. And then there are 4 different ways of identifying what is the brown pigment that is a positivity for PDL1 by immunohistochemistry. And that includes TPS score, TC score, IC score, and CPS score. And for each organ of origin, there is a slightly different way that it is evaluated. Not only that, we have 4 different monoclonal antibodies that are available. These have been identified as companion diagnostics for very specific tests and for very specific targeted agents. For instance, 28.8 DACO is used for nivolumab. 22C3 is used for pembrolizumab. SP142 Ventana is used for atezolizumab. And SP263 is used for durvalumab. And the companion diagnostics also have specific machines that are limited to the kits that are available. Fortunately, this very costly setup is not necessary. And we have now proven that in the real world, there is most of these monoclonal antibodies and assays are interchangeable. Now we move to tissue agnostic molecular testing. So irrespective of whether the tumor arises in the lung or the breast or any other organ, if there is a specific gene fusion, for instance, in this I have mentioned NTRK gene fusion, then there could be a specific targeted treatment irrespective of where the tumor has started in the body. So the first approval by US FDA was in 2017. And then each year subsequently, 18, 19, and 20, we have had FDA approval for specific gene fusions and specific targeting drugs, irrespective of where the tumor has started. How do we do this in the process of randomized clinical trial to prove that this is really useful? Unfortunately, that is never going to happen. Patients will not wish to be randomized if you have a targeted therapy which gives a 75% overall response rate versus chemotherapy that gives a 30% overall response rate with their control arm. So obviously, this would be unethical. Conditional approvals and follow-up studies are therefore unlikely. And the real-world data is the only way that we are going to be moving ahead. And in a lighter vein, I have said that in real life, men get apsaras only on pencils and women get badshahs only on masalas. The rest is all myth. There is a very crucial role that molecular tumor boards play. And this is because this field is dynamic. Every day, new information becomes available. Every week, new information is loaded onto publicly available and interrogable databases. And therefore, expertise is really valuable in making the best for our patients. So molecular tumor boards help navigate and understand the complex NGS reports. It helps translate molecular interrelations into genuine clinical indications. Video conferencing means that we are able to access global expertise while sitting in our homes. And therefore, ultimately, we will be able to give a more extensive precision medicine and personalized oncology management for our patients. This is publication in European Journal of Cancer 2019, and it talks about efficacy of molecular targeted agents given in the randomized trial Shiva 01 according to the ESMO scale for clinical actionability of molecular targets. We all know that when Shiva was first published, it said that this using molecular testing and targeting agents is all humbug and it does not improve overall survival. At the time when Shiva trial was done, there were very limited actionable mutations or drugs that were available to us for molecular targeting. Over the last 3 years, that has changed dramatically. And if Shiva trial was done again today, we would find that more than 50% of patients would actually benefit in terms of overall survival based on molecular designated targeted therapy. And this is the proof. And this is an example from the PRESSING trial, which is negative hyperselection for metastatic colorectal cancer. And the negative part is shown in blue. The positive patients are shown in red. And whether you look at graph C, which is disease-free survival, progression-free survival, and graph D, which is overall survival, you can clearly see that the curves are separating, and this is statistically significant. This was in Annals of Oncology. So much so that now molecular biomarkers have been incorporated into NCCN guidelines, which are used all over the world and which are considered as acceptable standard of care. But please remember the pager. Pager nobody uses now. Pager is like a dinosaur, it has become extinct. And this would be the condition of oncologists who do not adapt or who do not evolve into using molecular oncology in their day-to-day practice in the real world. So today with biomarker testing, instead of giving a platinum doublet chemotherapy to all patients with non-small cell lung cancer, we can actually give a specific oral or intravenous agent, either single or in combination, to specific patients based on the molecular testing. So we are selecting out patients who are more likely to benefit and who will therefore have a greater chance of overall survival, which has now been proven for lung cancer. We must pause here and remember that whatever is published in the Caucasian population is not applicable to the Asian patients or to us Indians. If you look at this graph, you can see that the KRAS mutation in Caucasians is 20 to 30%, but that same mutation is less than 10% for Asian. And so also, if you look at the EGFR mutation, its incidence is 5 to 15% in the Caucasian population, but is as high as 50% in the Asian population. And to elaborate this further, this is a publication that we did in 2013 that mapped out the incidence of EGFR mutation in non-small cell lung cancer in various countries. And you can see that India is somewhere in the middle with the incidence of 25 to 40%. The USA is, as in the Caucasian population, between 2 and 14%. And the highest incidence is in some of the far eastern countries like Japan, Taiwan, and Korea, which is as high as 50%. What this means is that we have to look at our own mutations to decide what way we have to treat this patient. We cannot rely on the figures, percentages, and outcomes that come from the Caucasian world. So before jumping on the bandwagon of Oncotype DX or Foundation One, we have to think twice about what is applicable, because neither Foundation nor Oncotype DX has done any study in the Asian population, and especially none in the Indian setting. So this is an example how prognostic tests perform differently in Asian versus European patients. And if you look at Japan and Korea to the extreme right, they are compared to European centers, 5 European centers, Netherlands, and 9 European countries. And you can clearly see that the high risk patients are significantly higher in the Asian population as opposed to the low risk. And this is for breast cancer. So instead of looking at Oncotype DX, we should look at some tests which have been identified, studied, and validated from India for our Indian patients and also validated across the world. So Can-Assist Breast is one such prognostic test which has been identified in India. And you can see the large number of almost 17 centers, which includes very prominent, important centers across India. And then not only this has been published in international trials, but it has been in international journals, but it has also been studied in Europe and North America. So this is really very appropriate for India and is validated across the world. And this is how it clearly stratifies patients into poor and high risk, or high risk and low risk, irrespective of age. As you remember, in Oncotype DX, they are divided into less than 50 and more than 50. And the recurrence score has also, the cutoff keeps on changing. But that is not the case for Can-Assist Breast. And if you use Can-Assist Breast, which has been used in 240 plus oncologists across 30 cities in India, you can see that 91% adherence to risk stratification means 64% of the patients have actually avoided unnecessary chemotherapy. And I think this is the value of what we should follow in the real world, which is applicable to India and the rest of Asia. Finally, you should remember that complacency is stagnation. If you pay half the price, you will only get half the product. So this book is very important. What got you here won't get you there. If you want to do better, then you have to do something different, and that is molecular testing. If you want to know more, then you can learn more by enrolling for the certificate course on novel molecular testing in precision oncology. And if you can send me an email, I will send you further details for the same. With that, I thank the organizers for the opportunity to address you and share my thoughts on molecular testing in the real world with you. Thank you very much. And